I would ask for a minute of attention so we can start. I'm thinking I'm going to try this without a microphone. So let's see if it works better without a microphone. So for that I will need obviously silence. All right, so thank you very much for coming. We are still talking about existentialism. Tonight we're going to be talking about Soren Kierkegaard, a Danish philosopher. And I'm going to try to link Kierkegaard's philosophy with everything that we spoke before. As you remember, whoever was here before, we started with Camus, then Sartre, then Dostoevsky. That was last time. So this time we're going to talk about Kierkegaard. You will see there is quite a lot of interesting connections and similarities between these existential philosophers, but also there are differences. So I will just remind you about the major difference that we're going to face tonight, that Camus called philosophers like Kierkegaard, like Dostoevsky, like Jaspers, he called their philosophies philosophical suicides. The reason for that was that although they all acknowledged absurdity as the state of the world and the state of our lives, they try to find a way out of absurdity. Camus wanted us to face absurdity, to recognize and embrace absurdity, and live life understanding that the world is absurd, that the world as we know, also society, they are cold, emotionless and irrational. So when it comes to the individual existence, society and the world are not our friends. They don't care about us. They are cold, they are emotionless. So Camus said, even if nature was a little bit emotional, always irrational, it would be better, because our yearning for that closeness, for that nostalgia was extremely important. And man wanted that unity, that oneness with nature. But nature is obviously emotionless. So it doesn't care about everyday lives, about destinies, about our problems, existence, etc. Now for Camus, absurdity was the fact of living, and as such had to be recognized and embraced. Now why is Kierkegaard and his philosophy called philosophical suicide? Because for Camus, philosophers who found way out of absurdity are committing philosophical suicide. So what is the way out that Kierkegaard found is actually faith in God. So for Camus, God didn't exist. For Sartre, God was dead. He took that from Nietzsche. So this hardcore existentialist didn't believe in God and considered life to be completely godless. So we are here in this world, thrown out into existence, and we have to deal with it. So no God, no moral values, nothing is preordained, nothing is pre-contemplated, already waiting for us. We are the ones to decide how we're going to live our lives. We are the only creators of our values. These are Camus and Sartre. Now I'm going to talk to you about Kierkegaard, and you will see the difference. So it is important, as I mentioned, my friend, that we connect things. So the idea of talking about existential philosophers, as this is maybe the last one that we're going to be talking about existentialism, is to have the whole picture and to connect the dots, to see why have I, for example, chosen Kierkegaard to be the last one when he is chronologically the first existential philosopher. So there is a reason for that, because I found him the most peculiar, the most complex, and the most profound philosopher of all of this that we have mentioned so far: Camus, Sartre, and Dostoevsky. So Kierkegaard's capital work is definitely Either Or. Is the first work published in 1843 when Kierkegaard was 30 years old. It is important to mention that this is very much autobiographical work. like other works as well. So Kierkegaard is constantly revising, reinterpreting, doubting, approving, trying to justify his life, and especially life that is orbiting around his love life. So Kierkegaard was in love with Regine Olsen. They were very much in love. Kierkegaard was from the wealthy family as well. His father was very rich. He inherited lots of money, so he belonged to the higher class when it comes to financial, obviously, wealth, to the higher class of Copenhagen of Denmark. And Regine Olsen was his match. She was the love of his life. So they got engaged. But just after receiving his doctorate, Kierkegaard broke engagement with Regine Olsen. And that was taken as a shock in the community, in academic world, in the higher class he lived in, church as well, societies. Everybody who knew about him was absolutely shocked that he has actually broken the engagement with Regine Olsen. Now Kierkegaard does that and then publishes Either Or just after that. In Either Or, Kierkegaard deals with different themes, as I will explain now. But the problem of love constantly remains alive. In the first and in the second part, his main focus is actually on love. But let's start with short description, synopsis of Either Or. So Either Or is written in two parts, major parts. The first part is concerned about aesthetic life. So there is something that he calls aesthetic life. Aesthetic life is life of the individual, is subjective, personal, focuses mainly on individual pleasures, on immediate satisfactions, which are clearly subjective and they are temporary because they are literally momentary. So in order to describe fully his aesthetic, his view on aesthetic life, he starts with art, he starts with music, and he starts with drama. So he focuses on Mozart's opera Don Giovanni, which is opera about Don Juan. So Kierkegaard says music is very important. We experience music subjectively because you can't experience it collectively. It's aesthetic experience. It has to be subjective. And what is impressive about music and what attracts us is actually that constant imagination. So aesthetic experience has to trigger imagination. We literally don't know what to expect, but every next moment we expect that satisfaction, that pleasure of listening to the music. So music gives us that constant state of being high, being satisfied, being happy, being excited. So this is why we are so much attracted to music. But as we know, when the music stops, that state and that experience stops as well. So now he says music is enough to give us full aesthetic satisfaction, pleasure. But he says drama is also important because in drama we connect with the main protagonist of drama, like for example Don Juan, by imagining that we are the main protagonist. So we need to imagine that we are Don Juan. And literally, as Aristotle used to explain in his Poetics, you have to immerse yourself into the main character and then you will experience the main plot. So what is the story about Don Juan? Why is it so important for Kierkegaard? Why is he relating Don Juan to aesthetic pleasure? Because he connects that aesthetic life to aesthetic love. Now Don Juan is a famous lover, and very specific thing about him was that he never slept with a woman twice, the same woman twice. So he always had to be once, and then he would move on. He was more excited to find another one than to spend time with the same one. So now we're going to get slowly to that to the crux of aesthetic problem for Kierkegaard. So moving from one woman to another, Don Juan actually constantly experienced that aesthetic pleasure. He is afraid of what? He is afraid of repetition, because he thinks that repetition will bring him into boredom, and the boredom is absolutely the killer of aesthetic pleasure. So Don Juan's problem is repetition and boredom. So in the chapter which is called crop rotation, Kierkegaard talks about the importance of avoiding boredom and repetition in life. Because if that happens, we start losing passion. We start losing interest. We start losing excitement. So as farmers change the crops on the same plot, so the different crops require different minerals, but also bring different elements to the soil, changing the crops makes better yield. The same applies to love life, according to Kierkegaard in the first part. In the first part, I just did mention this, that Kierkegaard wrote his book is always using different names. He never used his own name. So the first one is Johannes Climacus. Apparently, this is his story. Also called as person A. Actually, Johannes Climacus will appear as the author of the last chapter, which is called Seducer's Diary. But the person who talks about this is simply called person A. So person A continues in the crop rotation that the main point of happy, sensual, exciting life, aesthetic love is to change the crop, to change the source of excitement. So duty is detrimental for aesthetic pleasure. For example, person A says duty, for example, like in marriage, is detrimental for that pleasure, because it's simply going to kill that freedom and imagination that bachelor has. So we can see in the first part, person A defends bachelor's life, defends that immediate, temporary, momentary pleasure and sensation. And he says this is a static way of living. Now in Seducer's Diary, Kierkegaard goes further, a step further, and he explains why actually, how the Johannes seduces his victims, if I can say, and how and why he is doing that. So Johannes Climacus finds a Regina, nice, beautiful young girl, 17 years old, and he meets her. He says, the first time when I saw her, I was so excited. Just seeing her awakened so many pleasures in me, so much happiness. Just seeing her. Then I learned her name. Oh, that was so romantic, so amazing. It took a bit of time that he get to know her and to meet her. And all this, Kierkegaard explains in detail how important that was. All this development of knowing somebody. I mean, we have all experienced that, I hope, how exciting that is in real life when you meet somebody and then you get to know each other and the time passes and every next meeting, every next phone call is so exciting and you can't wait and you're so emotional about every contact, whatever that be. But this is not the physical and sexual contact. So Johannes is trying to seduce the girl by all means, bringing her up to engagement. So now they're getting engaged. So, but that's not enough for Johannes. He wants more excitement. So what is next? Now Johannes wants to make the girl to come to the conclusion that Johannes is not really the right man for her, and that the girl is the one who is going to break engagement. And he succeeded in that. while he was succeeding in that, he was already planning another seduction with another girl. So this is, in a way, the story of aesthetic life and aesthetic love. So it's constantly in that yearning, expecting something to happen. But important to say is that that is always happening outside the individual. It's never inside. So all these excitements are literally outside provocations, which aesthetic lover is looking for. So constant challenge, constant state of imagination, expectation, yearning, hoping, but never duty, never final product, never repetition. So this is the part one. Part two, start with person B or judge. Judge is more experienced, married man, who writes a letter to Johannes Climacus. And in that letter, he explains to Johannes why Johannes is actually wrong and why he didn't understand that the real aesthetic love can only happen in marriage. So now we are having the opposite side. We have the dialectical expression of love. So you have aesthetic love, and then on the other side you have married love. Now the judge explains to Johannes why married love actually means real aesthetic pleasure. So he says to Johannes, while you're constantly looking for something outside yourself to happen, and that something is never happening to you, I have that in my life every day. You are afraid of commitment, you are afraid of duty. Sounds familiar, isn't it? The girls, you're quiet, but I know you. Girls. So, you are afraid of commitment, you're afraid of duty, because you think that that is going to kill your passion and your aesthetic satisfaction. But he says you are wrong. Now in the letter, he explains why he is wrong. He says, when I got married, me and my wife, we have now the agreement to fulfill each other's desires, duties, responsibilities, but constantly for the rest of our lives. How romantic. 1843. Sounds familiar to our world? Not really. So, he says the passion is in the challenge that we maintain that first love, first impression, first satisfaction, first aesthetic pleasure, which is still there. It didn't disappear, but it's just growing in something much, much deeper. So he's completely denying everything that actually Johannes Climacus defended in the first part. So marriage is actually the real thing. Marriage is the one in which individual has those experiences, but they're inwards. They're not outside. So he said, I don't wait for opportunity to happen. I have that with me. And in the everyday challenges, we grow together, we change together, we challenge each other together, and in that actually we develop our aesthetic love even further. So it's a full defense of marriage. I mean, beautiful defense of marriage. Whoever believes in marriage should read Kierkegaard's second part. But Kierkegaard would be Kierkegaard if this would be the end of story. So, what Kierkegaard has to say to us? He actually says that neither aesthetic love nor married love is a clear-cut situation. Both of them are important. Both of them have good things that he defended throughout, but also they have problems. They have problems. So neither, this is why he calls the book either or. So if you think that either aesthetic love or married love or is your answer, you may be wrong. Because in the real life, they are quite mixed, both of them. So whatever was said for aesthetic love is still valid in married love, and whatever was said in the married love can relate to aesthetic love. Kierkegaard, being on the crossroads himself, being constantly hunted by his experience of breaking engagement with Regina Olsen, says himself, he has the following: if you don't marry, you will regret it. If you marry, you will regret it. If you don't marry or you marry, you will also regret it. He says, if you believe a woman, you will regret it. If you don't believe a woman, you will regret it. If you believe a woman or you don't believe a woman, you will also regret it. He says, if you hang yourself, you will regret it. If you don't hang yourself, you will regret it. If you do one or another, you will again regret it. And he says all the philosophy is actually summarized in these examples. This is how I understand all philosophy. He basically embraces the absurdity of life, because everything that happened to him wasn't straightforward. He loved that woman, he wanted to be with her, but then he realized that he can't be with her for some reasons. So he acknowledged that absurdity of existence. And he says that whatever you do or you don't do, you will regret it. So this is Kierkegaard's view on very detailed explanation about existential love and married love. Now either or ends up with a small chapter in which Kierkegaard actually offers a solution. And that solution would be God, interesting enough. So what he says all this anxiety that the life creates for us, either this or that, or maybe it would be much better if he said neither nor, because nothing works. He says all this anxiety, he was the first one to introduce the word angst, anxiety, dread. All this anxiety, he says, cannot be cured unless you have faith in God. And this is where he criticizes Hegel, because, and then he says, having faith in God means that you acknowledge that we are always wrong against God. So whatever we do, when we compare ourselves with God, we're going to be wrong. So at least there is no anxiety anymore. So everything man-made, society, church, morality in the pejorative sense, everything man-made is wrong. So this is direct criticism on Hegel, which was his nemesis. He disagreed with Hegel completely, because Hegel was all about morality and the state and the marriage and the traditional way of life. Kierkegaard proposed everything. But he finds the way in faith. So what kind of faith is that? Is that the Christianity or faith that the church propagates? No, it's very different faith. It's direct relationship between the individual and God. So Kierkegaard doesn't want mediators. Who is the mediator? Church is the mediator. State is the mediator. Morality is mediator. So he doesn't want that. He wants people to have direct relationship to God without mediation. And that relation has to be completely honest and completely a complete surrendering to God. Although it is absurd, as we will see in the next book, it has to be done that way. So that leap of faith that he talks about is something that he doesn't explain in detail in either or, but he is preparing the ground for the critical book that will come later, 4 years later, which is called see? Human mind.
Fear and trembling?
Fear and Trembling, of course, yes. I read it maybe God knows how many times. So in Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard will explain to us in much more in detail what is that leap of faith all about through the story of Abraham and Isaac. Now, I'm not going to go talk about that, because I would rather have us having the discussion first, and then, if necessary, I will remind you about the book Fear and Trembling and the beautiful story of Abraham and Isaac, and even more beautiful explanation that Kierkegaard gave us, his view of that story, and why is that story so important. So with this I'll finish my lecture and I'll give you the floor. Thank you.